A WGA member is speaking out against Hollywood production companies' DEI agenda and how it is ruining superhero films and TV shows, not to mention other genres as well. Before we get into this, I'd like to ask you please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. Let's get into this here. So, an anonymous WGA member sent an email to Film Threat outlining 5 points that confirm nearly all theories about why the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Arrowverse, and other superhero films and TV shows have been utter trash over the last half decade or so. So, first, the member shared that, quote, writers hired on comic book shows are told it's a positive that they are unfamiliar with the original comic book and not a fan of the existing IP because they want to do a, quote, modern new take on the material relevant to today. So I think we have lots of evidence to confirm this. Obviously, we have all of this evidence kind of creating these theories about like this is why this stuff sucks because this is what these people are doing. And we point to some of this evidence here. But now we're having a WGA writer confirming a lot of these theories. But just as like some points of evidence that I think backs up what this person is saying as well, is you can point to Jack Schaefer, who wrote WandaVision and Black Widow. She admitted to Deadline back in 2021, I'm not a very good comic reader. I have a hard time digesting the storylines, and I never know which cell to look at, and I don't know. I'm a disappointment perhaps to the fandom in that way, but the imagery is always, of course, very startling and moving and inspiring. And it was Kevin Feige's idea to marry Wanda and Vision to the sitcom world. She would later reveal to Mashable she had no idea who Mephisto was. She says there was never any conscious intention on my part to create any Mephisto red herrings because I didn't know who Mephisto was until I started doing press. Why do we talk about the devil so much? That's a real coincidence. So clearly, hiring people that have no idea about the comic book IP and they see that as a positive. This is someone that they've kind of, I feel like they've tapped to write the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. An absolutely terrible idea. And one of the main reasons why this stuff has been utter garbage is because they are indeed trying to distance themselves from the IP. Schaefer also has said, I think it was an interview with Inverse about how she would never put ideas from the past comic book canon into her stories that she found objectionable. So she was going to change the characters, change the themes, change the storylines in her quote unquote adaptations as well. So it's pretty damning, right? So we had that from her, and then we had this. It's not just writers. Actor John Cena shared that he was told not to do any research for Peacemaker at the behest of James Gunn. He did an appearance on the Podly podcast. You can watch it here on thatparkplace.com. But this is what he says. I think he didn't want me to read those comics because he didn't want me to develop biases to come on set and go like, the comics say this. So I know what you're telling me, but Peacemaker is more like this because of what I read. And it actually worked out great because, you know, the Peacemaker's material is archival. It's old. It's not of today. So to take a character and retrofit all that stuff and make it appropriate for what James Gunn wanted for the series, he actually gave me the advice not to read those comics, and I'm glad he did. I guess there were fans of the series. It looked utterly stupid to me. I didn't watch it. And one of the main reasons I didn't watch it is because it clearly didn't look anything like Peacemaker from the comics. It looked like an original creation that was wearing the skin suit of Peacemaker. And when I get a sniff of that, I just have no interest in watching anything like that. And I think there's a lot of other people that did the same as well. The second point from this WGA member over in the email to Film Threat says this: writers are asked why this story today, how is it relevant politically today to the existing narrative they're pushing on our culture, and why are you the person to tell it? Because I have talent and wrote it is not a valid answer. What is a valid answer is because I'm a member of this aggrieved group or class, and only we can tell our own story. So I think this is also true. We see this all the time. One of the biggest examples is the upcoming X-Men 97 animated series. The series' executive producer, Bo DeMaio, shared during Marvel's X-Men 60 Uncanny Years live virtual event about the upcoming show. He says, came up with a pitched it to Kevin Feige, and, you know, him and Brad Winterbaum could not have been more supportive and also just encouraging to make sure we got it right. I think one of my favorite parts was like they were truly interested in like what my experience as a black gay man was and how it was going to inform the story we were telling. And that to them was like, that is how we're going to make this authentic. So there you go, clearly telling a story from the black gay man's perspective with X Men. Um, and you see this all the time. I mean, the reason why Scarlett Johansson had to drop out of a film is because they said um, transgender, even though the character that she was playing wasn't even a transgender. It was just utterly absurd. So there's lots of examples of this as well, and I think this is definitely one of the big reasons why this stuff sucks, because they also try and ham fist their own personal experiences and then their own ideologies into the stories. Just as I was talking about with Jack Schaefer about how she wanted to, or how she wouldn't put in themes that she found objectionable in the classic comic book stories that everyone knows and loves, and why the comic book characters are popular in the first place and why they would want to do adaptations in the first place. So the third point, the WGA member says, this leads to a heads we win, tails you lose game where if you don't include diverse characters, you're dinged for having an all white, non diverse cast, regardless of the time or place of the story or historical accuracy. And if you do have a case, race, gender, then you are guilty of cultural appropriation. This means that unless you are, for example, African American, you're not allowed to tell a story about an African American character, or disabled or LGBTQI2 plus. Unless you are that specific subgroup, you can't write it. Christopher Priest actually talked about this back in 2018 when DC Comics wanted him to write a Cyborg story. This is what he said. So I got a call from DC and they wanted to talk to me about Cyborg. I gave them the standard stump speech. I don't want to be a black writer. When did I become a black writer? I used to be a guy who would write Spider-Man, Deadpool, and Batman. Why am I no longer qualified to write those characters? How did I get typecast from writing Black Panther of all things, when that series was never really about Black Panther? It was about the white guy, about Ross. It was narrated through his voice, and I thought I wrote a very well-constructed white character. Why are you now pigeonholing me as a guy who can only write black characters? And we saw this all the time. I feel like this has kind of been tamped down a little bit, where there was like this huge push, I guess like 4 years ago, maybe, where you had to be the specific identity to either act in it, as I was mentioning, Scarlett Johansson, or even write about those types of characters. It was utterly ridiculous and just idiotic and stupid. And it was clearly just a power grab by people that were using those so-called identities to move themselves up the Hollywood ladder. The fourth point, and it hurt. I think it hurt the shows and films substantially. I mean, just look at what's come out over the past 5 years. Absolute garbage. As for the fourth point, the WGA member said there's a bias towards the 2 for or 3 for hire. Being gay, for example, isn't enough now. You have to be gay, African American, Latin X, undocumented, unhoused, differently abled. Then on the DEI scorecard, they have a 2 times or 3 times positive score for the hire. So he's talking about these new WGA diversity cards that Film Threat has covered over there. Not going to get into that. You can definitely check their website out and see that. But they do indeed have that. We also know that these studios have all this stuff too, right? You can just look at it. It's all public. Disney has the Reimagine Tomorrow stuff. Amazon has their inclusion and diversity standards. They all have these point systems, basically, where you have to be in these certain check boxes in order to basically get your show greenlit. And that goes for like cast, it goes for people behind the scenes in production, it goes for the actors, etc., etc., etc. And what's the next big Star Wars show that's supposed to be coming up? Big. I say big as if like it's gonna be the next disastrous Star Wars show that's coming up. It's The Acolyte. The lead actor is Amanda Stenberg, who happens to be black and claims to be she's a lesbian, non-binary, and an intersectional feminist. So she's got the forfer going on there. So I definitely think we see that in Hollywood casting. And then finally, this fifth point here is to give you an idea of how competitive things are. For only Murders in the Building, there was word a staff position was available. This is the lowest rung the lowest rung writing position. They received 450 scripts as writing samples for this one job. A manager told me these jobs would, quote, typically go to a BIPOC writer, but the show decided not to hire anyone or to go in another direction. So confirming that indeed managers are indeed using quotas to fill positions. And it's not just in the superhero genre, it's outside of the superhero genre as well. Only Murders in the Building sounds like it's a drama. I'm not familiar with it, but that's indeed what it sounds like. It's not surprising that positions are becoming more competitive. We know that would be the case. Script Doctor has talked about that extensively, how the new WGA deal would make it much more competitive for writers. There wouldn't be as many opportunities. And we had already seen that happening as studios and studio executives were talking about cutting back on their budgets, cutting back how many productions they were going to do. We saw Amazon canceling shows like The Peripheral. We saw Kevin Feige talking about reducing the number of Marvel television shows and films they were going to be making. And Disney across the board has been making cuts to all of their studios. So it's very well documented that this was happening and this was coming. And he is now telling us that it is indeed happening. So it's interesting that there that this is how that we do now have a WGA writer confirming all this stuff. So people on the inside are finally now kind of coming out and talking about it, even though they are still remaining anonymous. Obviously, I understand why, because you don't want to basically be removed from the career that you are chasing. I get that fear. Probably isn't for the best, because you're not like really affecting change. Maybe you can think you're affecting change from the inside or something like that. But I do find it interesting that people are now indeed coming out from the inside, talking about this, calling it out, and showing how absolutely terrible it is, and using it to explain why all of these shows and films absolutely suck. Now, this is stuff that we have been talking about for years now. We do now have writers from within the WGA now vindicating everything that we have been saying. But let me know what you guys make of what this WGA member had to say here about their 5 points. Let me know in the comments below. And remember to always be charitable, but to always speak the truth.